Chapter 1. The Chalet in the Blizzard. The wind howled like a wounded beast, hurling snow against the narrow windows of the train as it climbed the serpentine tracks into the heart of the Alps. Hercule Poirot, seated in the plush compartment, adjusted his immaculate moustache with a gloved finger, his grey-green eyes scanning the blurred white world beyond the glass. The invitation had been peculiar, unsigned, save for a crest embossed with a silver snowflake, requesting his presence at the Chalet d'Hiver for a matter of utmost discretion. Poirot, never one to resist a puzzle, had accepted, though his little grey cells were already stirring with suspicion. The train shuddered to a halt at a desolate platform, the sign reading Col de Neige barely visible through the swirling snow. Poirot, wrapped in a heavy overcoat, stepped into the blizzard, his polished shoes sinking into the drifts. A figure emerged from the storm, a wiry man in a fur-lined coat, his face half hidden by a scarf. "Monsieur Poirot, I am Jacques, the chalet's caretaker. The sleigh awaits." The sleigh ride was a bone-rattling affair, the horses snorting clouds of steam as they pulled through the thickening snow. Poirot clutched his hat, his mind turning over the oddity of the invitation. Who, I wonder, desires the presence of Hercule Poirot in such a forsaken place? He murmured, his voice nearly lost in the wind. The Chalet d'Hiver loomed suddenly, a grand structure of dark wood and stone, its windows glowing like amber eyes against the storm. Jacques led Poirot inside, where warmth enveloped him like a velvet glove. The foyer was opulent, with a roaring fire in a massive hearth, crystal chandeliers casting prisms on the polished floor, and a grand staircase spiraling upward. Yet there was an air of disquiet, as if the chalet itself held secrets in its shadowed corners. A woman descended the staircase, her elegance marred by a nervous glance. "Monsieur Poirot, I presume," she said, her voice crisp with an English accent. "I am Lady Eleanor Vaughan, your host's representative. He regrets his absence tonight, but will join us tomorrow. The storm, you see, has delayed him." Poirot bowed, his eyes noting her tightly clasped hands. "And the other guests, madame? Are they also detained by this tempest?" "They are here," she replied, gesturing toward the parlour. "Come, you must be chilled." The parlour was a study in contrasts. Opulent furnishings clashed with the howling wilderness outside. A small group had gathered, their faces illuminated by the flickering fire. Poirot's gaze swept over them. A German industrialist with a stern jaw, a French actress with restless eyes, an American journalist scribbling in a notebook, a quiet Swiss doctor, and a young Italian couple whispering furtively. Each seemed to carry an invisible burden, their polite smiles failing to mask unease. Lady Vaughan introduced Poirot, her voice betraying a tremor. "Monsieur Poirot is here to ensure our gathering proceeds smoothly." The vagueness of her words hung in the air, and Poirot's little grey cells hummed. Why such secrecy? Why him? Dinner was announced, but as the group moved toward the dining room, a deafening crash echoed from above. The chandelier swayed, and a servant rushed in, pale-faced. "The pass is blocked. The snow has buried the road. No one can leave." A murmur rippled through the guests, and Poirot's eyes narrowed. Trapped in a chalet with strangers, each a potential piece in an unseen puzzle. He smoothed his moustache and smiled faintly. "Eh bien," he said softly, "it seems the game has begun. Listeners, what do you make of this mysterious gathering? Share your theories on who might be hiding a secret in the comments below. Hercule Poirot invites your suspicions." Chapter 2. the guests of suspicion. The dining room of the Chalet d'Hiver was a spectacle of grandeur. Its long mahogany table gleaming under the soft glow of candle-lit sconces. Crystal glasses caught the light, and the aroma of roasted pheasant mingled with the faint scent of pine from the surrounding forest, now buried under the relentless blizzard. Hercule Poirot, seated at the table's end, observed the assembled guests with the precision of a watchmaker. His little grey cells, ever active, noted every glance, every gesture, every pause in the conversation. The storm had tracked them, and Poirot sensed that the true storm was brewing within this room. Lady Eleanor Vaughan, the self-proclaimed representative of their absent host, presided at the table's head. Her poised demeanour faltered when a gust rattled the windows, her fingers tightening around her wineglass. "The chalet is secure," she assured, though her eyes darted toward the darkened hallway. Poirot noted her unease. Why did she fear the storm less than something within these walls? To her right sat Herr Wilhelm Brandt, a German industrialist whose broad shoulders and clipped speech suggested a man accustomed to command. His cold blue eyes scanned the room, lingering on each guest as if assessing a rival. "A fine place for a retreat," he remarked, his tone heavy with irony, "if one enjoys being caged." Poirot's moustache twitched. Brandt's words carried a weight beyond mere complaint. Across from him was Mademoiselle Celeste Dubois, a French actress whose fame had once lit up Parisian stages. Her auburn hair cascaded in calculated waves, and her laughter was bright, yet her eyes flicked nervously toward the door whenever a servant entered. "This isolation, it is romantic, no?" she said, but her fingers shredded a napkin beneath the table. Poirot wondered what performance she was concealing. Mr. Samuel Harper, an American journalist with a wiry frame and ink-stained fingers, scribbled furiously in a small notebook, pausing only to adjust his spectacles. "A story's brewing here. I can smell it," muttered, his gaze darting between the guests. Poirot observed the man's restless energy. Did he seek a scoop, or was he hiding his own narrative? Dr. Émile Laurent, a Swiss physician with a quiet demeanour, sat beside Harper. His hands, steady and precise, suggested a surgeon's skill, yet his eyes avoided contact, fixed on his plate. When asked about his work, he murmured, "I treat the body, not the soul," and fell silent. Poirot's mind catalogued this reticence, guilt perhaps or fear of exposure. The Italian couple, Signor and Signora Rossi, Giuseppe and Lucia, sat close, their hands entwined. Giuseppe's dark eyes burned with intensity, while Lucia's delicate features were marred by a frown. They spoke little, but their whispers in Italian were rapid, almost furtive. Poirot, fluent in the language, caught fragments. "We must be careful, and he cannot know." Who, Poirot wondered, was he? The final guest, introduced late, was Miss Clara Henshaw, an Englishwoman of middle age, with a severe bun and a pinched expression. She claimed to be a botanist studying alpine flora, yet her hands bore no trace of soil, and her eyes followed Lady Vaughan with an unsettling intensity. "The mountains hide many secrets," she said cryptically, and Poirot's interest sharpened. As the meal progressed, the conversation grew stilted, punctuated by the howl of the wind. Poirot, ever the observer, posed a seemingly innocent question. What brings such a varied company to this remote chalet? The silence that followed was thick, each guest's face a mask of guarded thoughts. Lady Vaughan's smile was strained. "Our host values eclectic gatherings," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. The guests were like pieces on a chessboard, each with a role yet to be revealed. The absence of the host, the cryptic invitation, the storm's timely arrival, it was no coincidence. Hercule Poirot does not believe in chance, he thought, his eyes gleaming. Someone in this room had a purpose, and he would uncover it. A sudden flicker of the candles drew gasps. The room plunged into shadow before the light returned. In that moment, Poirot saw it, a fleeting glance between two guests too quick to name, but heavy with meaning. The game, it seemed, was already afoot. Chapter 3. The first crack in the ice. The night had deepened, and the Chalet d'Hiver seemed to groan under the weight of the blizzard outside. The wind's relentless wail was a constant companion, seeping through the cracks of the ancient structure, as if the Alps themselves were whispering warnings. Hercule Poirot sat in the parlour, a cup of tisane in hand, his sharp eyes flitting over the guests who lingered after dinner. The fire cast long shadows, and the air was thick with unspoken tensions. Poirot's little grey cells were alert, sensing that the evening's calm was but a prelude to chaos. Lady Eleanor Vaughan had excused herself early, claiming a headache, but Poirot noted her hurried steps toward the staircase. Herr Brandt and Mademoiselle Dubois exchanged polite banalities. Their voices strained, while Mr. Harper's pen scratched incessantly in his notebook. Dr. Laurent stared into the fire, his face unreadable, and the Rossis sat in a corner, their whispers now silent, but their eyes darting nervously. Miss Henshaw, the botanist, clutched a book on alpine flora, though Poirot observed she had not turned a page in 20 minutes. A sudden scream shattered the quiet, high and piercing, echoing from the upper floors. The guests froze, their faces a tableau of shock. Poirot was on his feet in an instant, his small frame moving with surprising agility toward the source. "Rita, Rita," he urged, leading the group up the grand staircase, the servants trailing behind with lanterns. The scream had come from the east wing, where the guest rooms lined a dimly lit corridor. Jacques, the caretaker, stood outside a door, his face ashen. It's Herr Brandt," he stammered, pointing to the floor. Poirot pushed past him, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. Herr Wilhelm Brandt lay sprawled in the snow just outside his balcony door, his body half covered by the drifts that had blown in from the storm. His eyes stared blankly at the sky, and a dark stain spread across his chest, stark against the white. A dagger, its handle ornate with a silver snowflake crest, protruded from his heart. The balcony door hung ajar, creaking in the wind, and the room itself was empty, its fire reduced to embers. Poirot knelt beside the body, his gloved hands careful not to disturb the scene. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, his mind already cataloguing details. The snow around Brandt was undisturbed, save for a single set of footprints leading from the balcony to the body, and none returning. The dagger's crest matched the one on Poirot's invitation, a detail that made his moustache quiver with interest. The guests crowded behind, their gasps and murmurs filling the air. Mademoiselle Dubois clutched her shawl, her face pale. "Who could do this?" she whispered, though her eyes avoided the body. Mr. Harper scribbled furiously, muttering, "This is front-page material." Dr. Laurent stepped forward, his medical instincts overriding his reticence. "He's been dead less than an hour," he said, examining the body without touching it. "The cold has preserved him." Signor Rossi gripped his wife's arm, his voice low. "We should leave this place." Lucia's eyes were wide with fear, but she said nothing. Miss Henshaw, standing apart, muttered, The mountains keep their secrets well. Lady Vaughan, arriving last, swayed as if she might faint, but Poirot caught the flicker of calculation in her gaze before she hid it behind a handkerchief. Poirot stood, his expression calm, but his mind racing. "This is no accident," he declared, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Helbrandt has been murdered, and the killer is among us, trapped by this storm." He turned to Jacques. "Seal the chalet. No one enters or leaves until I say." The caretaker nodded, his hands trembling. Poirot's eyes swept over the group, noting every reaction. The footprints, the dagger, the locked balcony door. It was a puzzle designed to confound. But Hercule Poirot thrived on such challenges. The little grey cells, they are already at work, he thought, his gaze lingering on each guest. Someone had struck swiftly, and they believed the storm would hide their crime. They did not know Hercule Poirot. Who do you suspect is the murderer? Share your guesses in the comments. Can you outwit Poirot's little grey cells? Chapter 4. The Locked Room Riddle. The east wing corridor of the Chalet d'Hiver was a study in shadows, the flickering lanterns casting eerie patterns on the panelled walls. Hercule Poirot stood before Helbrandt's room, his small, precise figure a stark contrast to the chaos of the moment. The guests hovered at a distance, their faces a mix of fear and fascination, as Poirot's sharp eyes took in every detail of the scene. The body of Wilhelm Brandt lay outside on the balcony, the silver-handled dagger glinting in the lantern light. But it was the room itself that intrigued Poirot most. A locked room sealed from within, yet a murder had been committed. "Order and method," Poirot murmured, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. He turned to Jacques, the caretaker, who stood nervously by the door. "You are certain, monsieur, that this door was locked when you found the body?" Jacques nodded vigorously. "Oui, Monsieur Poirot. I tried the handle myself. It would not budge. I had to fetch the master key from the study." Poirot's moustache twitched as he stepped into the room, motioning for the others to remain outside. The chamber was elegantly appointed, with a four-poster bed, a mahogany desk, and a fireplace where embers glowed faintly. The balcony door, now ajar, had been forced open by Jacques, but the key remained in the lock on the inside. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A puzzle most ingenious," he said softly, "but Hercule Poirot is not so easily deceived." He examined the lock, noting its sturdy construction. No signs of tampering, no scratches on the key. The windows were latched, the heavy curtains undisturbed. The room was a fortress, yet someone had entered, or had they? Poirot's gaze fell on the balcony, where the single set of footprints led to Brandt's body, and stopped. No tracks returned to the room, and the snow beyond the balcony was a pristine, unbroken sheet, save for the drifts piled by the storm. "Impossible," muttered Mr. Harper, the journalist, craning his neck from the corridor. "No one could have gotten in or out without leaving tracks." His pencil hovered over his notebook, eager for a detail to seize upon. "Impossible?" Poirot echoed, his voice laced with amusement. "Non, monsieur. The impossible is merely the possible that has not yet been explained." He turned to Dr. Laurent, who lingered near the door. "You said Helbrandt died within the hour. Can you confirm the cause?" The Swiss doctor hesitated, then nodded. "The dagger wound was fatal, straight to the heart. He would have died instantly." His voice was steady, but his fingers twitched, betraying unease. Poirot's attention shifted to the room's contents. On the desk lay a leather-bound journal, its pages blank except for a single entry. "The snow hides all, but not forever." The handwriting was Brandt's, confirmed by Lady Vaughan, who had paled at the sight of it. Poirot tucked the journal under his arm, his mind noting the cryptic phrase. Nearby, a glass of cognac sat untouched, its amber liquid catching the light. A faint scent, bitter, almost medicinal, emanated from it, though Poirot made no comment. Mademoiselle Dubois, peering from the doorway, clutched her shawl tightly. "This place is cursed," she whispered, her theatrical flair barely masking genuine fear. Signor Rossi, standing beside his wife, muttered something in Italian too low for Poirot to catch. Miss Henshaw, ever watchful, stood apart, her eyes fixed on Lady Vaughan, who avoided her gaze. Poirot stepped onto the balcony, the cold biting through his coat. The snow was deep, but the footprints were clear. Large, deliberate, matching Brandt's boots. Yet the absence of return tracks gnawed at Poirot's logic. The killer wishes us to believe in a phantom, he thought, but the little grey cells, they see through such tricks. He turned to the group, his voice calm but commanding. "This is a crime of precision, mes amis. The locked door, the solitary footprints, the dagger with the snowflake crest, they are pieces of a puzzle, and Hercule Poirot will solve it." His eyes swept over the guests, noting Mademoiselle Dubois' trembling hands, Harper's eager scribbling, and the Rossis' furtive glances. Someone, he knew, was watching his every move. As the group dispersed, Poirot lingered, his mind turning over the riddle. The locked room was no accident. It was a challenge, a taunt to his intellect, and Poirot never refused a challenge. Can you unravel the locked room mystery? Share your theories on how the killer escaped in the comments. Test your wits against Poirot's. Chapter 5. Whispers in the Candlelight. The dining room of the Chalet d'Hiver glowed with the soft, unsteady light of candles, their flames dancing in the draught that seeped through the storm-battered windows. The blizzard outside roared on, sealing the guests in their opulent prison, where the air was thick with suspicion. Hercule Poirot sat at the head of the long mahogany table, his posture impeccable, his grey-green eyes scanning the faces of the assembled company. The murder of Herr Wilhelm Brandt had cast a pall over the chalet, and tonight's dinner, meant to restore civility, only sharpened the undercurrents of unease. Lady Eleanor Vaughan, pale but composed, had insisted on the meal, declaring that we must maintain order in the face of tragedy. Yet her hands trembled as she lifted her wine-glass, and Poirot noted the faint quiver in her voice when she addressed the group. "We are all shaken," she said, "but we must trust Monsieur Poirot to find the truth." Her eyes met his briefly, and Poirot detected a plea, perhaps for protection, perhaps for secrecy. To her left, Mademoiselle Celeste Dubois toyed with her fork, her usual vivacity subdued. "This place, it suffocates," she murmured, her French accent thick with emotion. "Who could do such a thing to poor Herr Brandt?" A question hung in the air, unanswered, but Poirot observed her glance toward Mr. Samuel Harper, the journalist, who sat across from her, his pen scratching even as he ate. Harper's eyes gleamed behind his spectacles, his enthusiasm undimmed by the grim atmosphere. "A locked room, a dagger, a snowstorm. This is the stuff of headlines," he said, his voice too loud for the somber mood. "Where were you all when the scream was heard?" He posed the question casually, but Poirot's moustache twitched at the journalist's boldness. Was Harper fishing for a story, or deflecting attention? Dr. Émile Laurent, seated beside Harper, sipped his water in silence, his gaze fixed on the table. When pressed by Harper's question, he replied curtly, "I was in my room, reviewing medical notes." His tone was flat, but Poirot noted the doctor's fingers, clenched tightly around his glass, betraying tension. Signor Giuseppe Rossi and his wife Lucia sat close, their chairs almost touching. Giuseppe's dark eyes scanned the room, while Lucia's delicate hand rested on his arm, as if anchoring herself. "We were together," Giuseppe said firmly, answering Harper's query, "in our room, discussing family matters." Lucia nodded, but her eyes darted to the floor, and Poirot's little grey cells registered the hesitation. What family matters required such secrecy? Miss Clara Henshaw, the botanist, sat at the table's far end, her severe expression softened only slightly by the candlelight. "I was in the library," she said, her voice clipped, "studying my notes on the outline flora." She produced a small notebook, its pages filled with meticulous sketches, but Poirot's keen eye caught a detail. The ink was fresh, as if written moments before. A prepared alibi, perhaps? As the meal progressed, the conversation faltered, punctuated by the clink of cutlery and the howl of the wind. Poirot, ever the orchestrator, steered the discussion with subtle questions. "It is curious, is it not," he said, his voice smooth as velvet, "that Herbrandt's journal contained only one entry. The snow hides all, but not forever. What do you make of it, mes amis?" The effect was immediate. Mademoiselle Dubois' fork clattered to her plate. Harper's pen paused mid-stroke. Dr. Laurent's gaze flickered to Lady Vaughan, who quickly sipped her wine. The Rossi exchanged a glance, and Miss Henshaw's lips tightened. Poirot leaned back, satisfied. The journal's words had struck a nerve, though which nerve he could not yet say. A servant entered, carrying a tray of desserts, but the candlelight flickered violently as another gust shook the chalet. In the brief darkness, Poirot heard a whisper, low, urgent in Italian, from the Rossi's direction, "Non ora, Giuseppe." Not now. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The candlelight had hidden the speaker, but not from his ears. As the meal concluded, Lady Vaughan rose, her voice strained. "We must rest and trust in Monsieur Poirot's genius." But Poirot sensed the fear beneath her words. The guests dispersed, their footsteps echoing in the silent corridors, each carrying their secrets like shadows. Poirot remained in the dining room, his fingers tracing the rim of his glass. The alibis were too neat, the glances too guarded. The truth, he thought, is like the snow outside, covering all, but ready to melt under scrutiny. Someone at this table knew more than they admitted, and Poirot would uncover it, step by meticulous step. Whose alibi seems shakiest to you? Share your thoughts in the comments. Can you spot the lie before Poirot does? Chapter 6. The Footprints That Vanished. The morning light struggled through the Chalet d'Hiver's frost-covered windows, casting a pale, ghostly glow over the snow-laden Alps. The blizzard had paused, leaving an eerie stillness, as if the mountains themselves held their breath. Hercule Poirot stood on the balcony outside Herbrandt's room, his overcoat buttoned tightly against the biting cold. His grey-green eyes fixed on the single set of footprints in the snow, those leading to Brandt's body. Stark and solitary, with no trace of return, the puzzle of the locked room had deepened, and these vanishing footprints were its heart. "A crime," Poirot murmured, "that mocks the laws of logic, but Hercule Poirot will not be mocked." The guests had been confined to the parlour under Jacques' watchful eye, their murmurs of unease audible even through the chalet's thick walls. Poirot had insisted on examining the balcony alone, save for Dr. Laurent, whom he had summoned for his medical precision. The doctor stood nearby, his breath clouding in the frigid air, his face taut. "The footprints are clear," Laurent said, his voice low. "They match Brant's boots, exactly. But how could the killer leave no trace?" Poirot knelt, his gloved fingers hovering over the tracks. The snow was compact, the prints deep and deliberate, ending at Brant's body, where the dagger with the silver snowflake crest still protruded. Beyond the body, the snow was pristine, undisturbed by even the lightest step. Poirot's moustache quivered as he traced the air above the tracks. "It is not what is here, monsieur, but what is not here that speaks loudest," he said cryptically. He rose, his gaze sweeping the balcony's edge. The railing was low, the drop to the ground below steep but not impossible. Yet the snow on the ground was untouched, and the chalet's walls bore no marks of climbing. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he noticed a faint irregularity in the snow near the railing. A slight depression, almost imperceptible, as if something had brushed the surface. He filed this away, his little grey cells humming. Inside, Poirot examined the balcony door's lock again. The key remained on the inside, undisturbed, and the door's hinges showed no signs of force beyond Japs's entry. The room itself yielded little new. The cryptic journal entry, the untouched cognac with its faint medicinal scent, and a single cigarette butt in the ashtray, its brand foreign to Brant's preferences. Poirot pocketed it, his mind turning over possibilities. Returning to the parlour, Poirot found the guests restless. Mademoiselle Celeste Dubois paced near the fire, her eyes red-rimmed, as if she had not slept. "This place is a tomb," she whispered, clutching her shawl. Mr. Samuel Harper, ever the journalist, scribbled notes, his gaze darting to Poirot. "Found anything, Monsieur Poirot? Those footprints are a real head-scratcher." His tone was eager, but Poirot detected a flicker of calculation in his eyes. Lady Eleanor Vaughan sat stiffly, her hands folded in her lap. "Have you solved the riddle, Monsieur Poirot?" she asked, her voice strained. Poirot noted her pallor. She knew more than she revealed, he was certain. Signor and Signora Rossi sat close, their faces pale, while Miss Clara Henshaw, the botanist, watched Poirot with an intensity that bordered on defiance. "Footprints that vanish," she said softly, "like secrets in the snow." Poirot addressed the group, his voice calm but commanding. "The footprints tell a story, mes amis, but not the one the killer wishes us to believe. Someone has been clever, too clever perhaps." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I ask you now, who among you smokes Les Gauloises cigarettes?" He held up the butt, its blue and white tip gleaming in the candlelight. A ripple of unease passed through the room. Mademoiselle Dubois gasped, then quickly composed herself. I smoke occasionally," she admitted, "but not that brand." Harper's pen paused, and Dr. Laurent's fingers twitched. The Rossi exchanged a glance, and Lady Vaughan's eyes widened briefly before she looked away. Miss Henshaw remained silent, but her grip on her notebook tightened. Poirot smiled faintly. "The little grey cells, they are never idle. The footprints may vanish, but the truth does not." He turned to Jacques. "Ensure the balcony remains untouched. We will return to it." As the guests dispersed, Poirot's mind churned. The depression in the snow, the cigarette, the locked door, these were threads in a tapestry, and he would weave them together. How do you think the killer made the footprints vanish? Share your theories in the comments. Can you unravel the puzzle before Poirot? Chapter 7. A Past Buried in Snow. The Chalet in Snow. The Chalet d'Hiver stood entombed in snow, its walls creaking under the weight of the relentless storm that had resumed its fury overnight. Inside, the air was heavy with suspicion, the guests' faces drawn as they gathered in the library where Hercule Poirot had requested their presence. The room was a sanctuary of dark wood and leather-bound books, but its warmth did little to thaw the chill of fear. Poirot stood by the fireplace, his small frame commanding attention, his grey-green eyes gleaming with purpose. The murder of Herr Wilhelm Brandt was a puzzle, and a new piece had just come to light, one buried in the past, like footprints covered by fresh snow. Poirot held Brandt's leather-bound journal, its single cryptic entry, "The snow hides all, but not forever," etched in his mind. His morning inquiries, discreetly conducted with the help of Jacques, the caretaker, had uncovered a document in Brandt's luggage. A faded letter, its edges worn, tucked inside a hidden pocket. The letter, written in German, bore a date from 10 years prior, and was addressed to Brandt from a man named Klaus Richter. Its tone was bitter, accusing Brandt of betrayal in a business venture that had ruined Richter's family. The signature was scrawled with fury, and a single line stood out: "You will pay Wilhelm when the time comes." Poirot's little grey cells hummed as he surveyed the guests. The letter was a threat, and he suspected it led to someone in this room. "Mes amis," he began, his voice smooth but firm. "The past, it has a way of rising, like a ghost through the snow. Herr Brandt was not a man without enemies. I ask you now, who among you knew him before this chalet?" A tense silence followed. Mademoiselle Celeste Dubois, seated near a window, clutched her shawl, her eyes wide. "I met him only here," she said quickly, her French accent sharp. "He was charming, but distant." Poirot noted the slight tremor in her voice. Fear, or something else? Mr. Samuel Harper, the journalist, leaned forward, his spectacles glinting. "I'd heard of Brandt. Big name in German industry. Ruthless, they say. But I never met him before." His tone was eager, but Poirot caught a flicker of hesitation, as if Harper knew more than he admitted. Dr. Émile Laurent, standing by a bookshelf, shifted uncomfortably. "I'm a doctor, Monsieur Poirot. I meet many people. Brandt was not one of them." His words were measured, but his hands, usually steady, betrayed a slight shake. Signor Giuseppe Rossi and his wife Lucia sat close, their faces pale. "We are strangers to him," Giuseppe said, his Italian accent thick. "We came for a holiday." Lucia nodded, but her eyes avoided Poirot's, and he sensed a secret in their clasped hands. Miss Clara Henshaw, the botanist, sat rigidly, her notebook open but untouched. "I study plants, not people," she said curtly. "Brandt meant nothing to me." Yet her gaze lingered on the journal in Poirot's hand, and he wondered what knowledge she guarded. Lady Eleanor Vaughan, pale and composed, spoke last. "Herr Brandt was a guest like the rest of you. I knew him only through our host's invitation." Her voice was steady, but Poirot observed her fingers, twisting the hem of her sleeve, a sign of nerves, perhaps. Poirot paced slowly, the journal in hand. "This letter," he said, holding it aloft, "speaks of a betrayal, a debt unpaid." Klaus Richter, a name from Brandt's past, swore vengeance. "Does this name mean anything to you?" He watched their faces closely, searching for the telltale flicker of recognition. The reaction was subtle, but unmistakable. Dr. Laurent's eyes widened briefly before he looked away. Mademoiselle Dubois' breath caught, and she covered it with a cough. Harper's pen paused mid-stroke. The Rossi exchanged a glance, and Miss Henshaw's lips tightened. Lady Vaughan's face remained impassive, but her hands stilled, as if bracing for a revelation. Poirot's moustache twitched. The little grey cells, they see what the eyes conceal, he thought. He decided to press further. Dr. Laurent, you are Swiss, no? And Hellbrand, a German industrialist. Is it possible you crossed paths in professional circles, perhaps under another name? Laurent's face flushed. I once worked in Zurich, where Brandt's company had interests, but I never knew a Klaus Richter. His voice was strained, and Poirot noted the sweat beading on his brow despite the cool room. The other guests shifted, their unease palpable. Poirot let the silence stretch, knowing it would unsettle them further. The letter was a key, and Dr. Laurent, or someone else, held the lock. The past had resurfaced, and with it a motive for murder, but whose? As the group dispersed, Poirot lingered, his mind turning over the clues, the letter, the footprints, the locked room, the cigarette butt. The chalet was a web, and the killer was caught in it, unaware that Hercule Poirot was tightening the strands. What do you make of this connection to Klaus Richter? Share your thoughts in the comments. Can you uncover the grudge before Poirot reveals all? Chapter 8. The Clock That Stopped. The Chalet d'Hiver seemed to hold its breath as the second day of the blizzard dawned, the snow piling higher against the windows, sealing the guests in a world of suspicion and shadow. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand hallway, his polished shoes silent on the polished floor, his grey-green eyes fixed on a tall grandfather clock that loomed against the wall. Its hands were frozen at 9:47, the pendulum still, a faint crack spider-webbing across its glass face. The clock had stopped, and Poirot, ever attuned to the rhythm of truth, sensed it was no accident. Time, he murmured, is the canvas on which the killer paints, and this canvas is torn. The guests had gathered in the parlour, their faces drawn from sleeplessness and fear. The murder of Herr Wilhelm Brandt hung over them like a storm cloud, and Poirot's relentless probing had only tightened the noose of suspicion. He had spent the morning revisiting Brandt's room, the locked door and vanishing footprints still a tantalizing riddle. But it was the clock, noticed by chance as he passed through the hallway, that now commanded his attention. Poirot summoned Jacques, the caretaker, who shuffled forward, his eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion. "Monsieur Jacques," Poirot said, his voice precise, "when did this clock stop? It is not like the Chalet d'Hiver to neglect such a fine piece." Jacques scratched his head, his scarf slipping to reveal a nervous swallow. "It was working yesterday morning, Monsieur Poirot. I wind it every Sunday. It must have stopped last night. Perhaps during the commotion. His voice faltered, and Poirot's moustache twitched. The commotion was Brandt's murder, and the clock's halt coincided suspiciously with the time of the scream. Poirot examined the clock closely. The crack on the glass was fresh, the edges sharp, and a faint dent marred the wooden frame, as if struck by a glancing blow. Inside, the mechanism was intact, but a small gear lay dislodged, halting the pendulum. This was no malfunction, Poirot thought. Someone ensured time stood still. He noted the clock's position, directly across from the staircase leading to the east wing, where Brandt's body was found. Turning to the guests, Poirot raised his voice, calm but commanding. "Mes amis, a curious detail has emerged. This clock stopped at 9:47 last night, the very hour of Hellbrandt's death. I ask you now, where were you at that precise moment?" His eyes swept the room, cataloguing every reaction. Mademoiselle Celeste Dubois, perched on a velvet chair, clasped her hands tightly. "I was in my room, preparing for bed," she said, her voice trembling. "I heard the scream and came running." Poirot noted her flushed cheeks. Nerves, or a lie? Mr. Samuel Harper, the journalist, adjusted his spectacles, his notebook open. "I was in the parlor writing," he said, his tone eager. "Heard the scream, same as everyone." Yet his fingers gripped his pen too tightly, and Poirot wondered what his notes concealed. Dr. Émile Laurent, standing by the window, spoke softly. "I was in my room, as I said before. I came out when I heard the cry." His eyes avoided Poirot's, and his hands, usually steady, fidgeted with his cufflinks. Signor Giuseppe Rossi and his wife Lucia sat close, their faces pale. "We were together," Giuseppe said firmly, "in our room, talking." Lucia nodded, but her eyes darted to the clock, and Poirot caught a flicker of fear. Did they know more about the stopped time? Miss Clara Henshaw, the botanist, sat stiffly, her notebook closed. "I was in the library, as I told you," she said, her voice sharp. "I didn't notice the clock." Her gaze was steady, but Poirot sensed defiance in her posture. Lady Eleanor Vaughan, seated near the fire, smoothed her skirt. "I was in my quarters resting," she said, her voice controlled. "The scream brought me out." Her composure was flawless, but Poirot noted her fingers twisting a ring, a sign of unease, perhaps. Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "The clock, it is a witness," he said. "It stopped at the moment of murder, perhaps by accident, perhaps by design. Someone wished to obscure the timeline, or to point us to it." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. A faint gasp escaped Mademoiselle Dubois, and Harper's pen scratched furiously. Dr. Laurent's jaw tightened, and the Rossi whispered in Italian, too low for Poirot to hear. He approached the clock again, his mind turning over the clues. The cracked glass, the dislodged gear, the precise timing. The clock stood near the staircase, a path to Brandt's room. Had someone passed it in haste, striking it? Or had it been stopped deliberately, a message from the killer? The letter from Klaus Richter, the vanishing footprints, the cigarette butt. All were pieces, and the clock was another. As the guests dispersed, Poirot lingered, his eyes on the frozen hands. The killer plays with time, he thought, but Hercule Poirot plays with truth. The stopped clock was a thread in the tapestry of deception, and he would pull it until the pattern emerged. Chapter 9. The Poisoned Chalice. The Chalet d'Hiver, cloaked in the third day of an unrelenting blizzard, seemed to pulse with secrets, its walls echoing the howl of the wind outside. The murder of Herr Wilhelm Brandt had cast a shadow over the snowbound guests, and the air in the parlor was thick with suspicion as they gathered for an afternoon tea, a fragile attempt at normalcy. Hercule Poirot sat near the fire, his grey-green eyes scanning the room with the precision of a hawk. The vanishing footprints, the stopped clock, the letter from Klaus Richter, all were pieces in a deadly puzzle. And now a new crime was about to shatter the chalet's uneasy calm. The silver tea service gleamed on a mahogany table, its delicate cups arranged with care by Lady Eleanor Vaughan, whose forced smile betrayed her nerves. Mademoiselle Celeste Dubois fidgeted with her shawl, her usual theatrical charm subdued. Mr. Samuel Harper scribbled in his notebook, his spectacles glinting with restless energy. Dr. Émile Laurent, the Swiss physician, sat quietly, his hands steady but his eyes wary. Signor Giuseppe Rossi and his wife Lucia whispered in Italian, their faces pale. Miss Clara Henshaw, the botanist, clutched her notebook, her gaze sharp and unyielding. Lady Vaughan poured the tea, her hands trembling slightly. "We must carry on," she said, her voice strained. Monsieur Poirot will guide us through this darkness. She handed a cup to Dr. Laurent, who nodded politely. As he sipped, his face contorted in a sudden grimace. The cup slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor, and he collapsed gasping, his hands clawing at his throat. Mon Dieu! Poirot leapt to his feet, his small frame a blur of action. Stay back, he commanded, kneeling beside Laurent. The doctor's pupils were dilated, his breath ragged, and a faint bitter almond scent lingered. Cyanide, Poirot said sharply, his mind racing. He turned to Jacques, the caretaker, who stood frozen nearby. Water, quickly, and a cloth. The guests erupted in panic. Mademoiselle Dubois pressed herself against the wall, her eyes wide with horror. Harper's pen fell, his notebook forgotten. The Rossi backed away, Lucia's hand over her mouth. Miss Henshaw stood rigid, her expression unreadable. Lady Vaughan swayed, clutching the table, her face ashen. Poirot administered water, steadying Laurent as his convulsions eased. He lives, Poirot announced, his voice calm but firm. The dose was small, a warning, not a death sentence. He examined the shattered cup, noting a faint powdery residue. The tea service remained untouched by the others, the poison clearly targeted. Poirot's mind flashed to the cognac in Brant's room, its medicinal scent a chilling parallel. Who prepared the tea? Poirot asked, his tone cutting through the chaos. Lady Vaughan's voice trembled. I did, Monsieur Poirot, but I swear it was not tampered with. Her eyes pleaded innocence, but Poirot noted her trembling hands, fear or guilt. He turned to the group, his gaze piercing. Someone in this room placed cyanide in Dr. Laurent's cup. Why him? What does he know? His eyes swept over the guests, cataloguing their reactions. Mademoiselle Dubois' breath hitched. Harper's spectacles slipped, and the Rossi exchanged a glance. Miss Henshaw's grip on her notebook tightened, and Laurent, recovering, coughed weakly, his eyes avoiding Poirot's. Poirot paced, his hands clasped behind his back. The poisoner is bold, but not flawless. The cyanide links to Brant's murder. Both crimes speak of precision, of knowledge. Dr. Laurent, your reaction to Klaus Richter's name was telling. Did you know of Brant's betrayal in Zurich? Did someone fear your knowledge? Laurent's voice was hoarse. I treated patients in Zurich, yes. I heard of Richter's ruin, but I had no part in it. His hands shook, and Poirot sensed a half-truth. The guests murmured, their fear palpable. Mademoiselle Dubois whispered, this place is cursed. Harper muttered, another scoop, but at what cost? The Rossi's whispers grew urgent, and Miss Henshaw's eyes narrowed, as if calculating. Lady Vaughan's ring-twisting betrayed her nerves. Poirot's moustache twitched. The little grey cells, they see the pattern, he thought. The poison was a desperate act, meant to silence or distract. The killer was among them, and their net was tightening. He addressed the group. No one leaves this chalet until the truth is uncovered. The poisoner will answer to Hercule Poirot. As the guests dispersed, their footsteps heavy, Poirot lingered, his eyes on the shattered cup. The killer was growing reckless, and he would exploit their mistake. The truth was close, hidden beneath the snow of deception. Who do you think poisoned Dr. Laurent? Share your suspicions in the comments. Can you outwit Poirot's little grey cells? Chapter 10. The Masquerade of Motives. The Chalet d'Hiver's parlour was a cocoon of flickering candlelight, the blizzard outside a constant reminder of the guests' captivity. The air was thick with tension, the near-fatal poisoning of Dr. Émile Laurent adding a fresh layer of dread to the shadow of Herr Wilhelm Brandt's murder. Hercule Poirot stood by the fireplace, his small frame radiating authority, his grey-green eyes gleaming with purpose. The clues, the vanishing footprints, the stopped clock, the poisoned tea, the letter from Klaus Richter, were threads in a tapestry, and Poirot was ready to pull them tighter. Tonight he would unmask motives cloaked in a game. The guests sat in an uneasy circle, their faces drawn. Lady Eleanor Vaughan twisted her ring, her composure fraying. Mademoiselle Celeste Dubois clutched a silk handkerchief, her eyes darting nervously. Mr. Samuel Harper's pen hovered over his notebook, his spectacles glinting. Dr. Laurent, pale but recovering, sat stiffly, his hands steady but his gaze wary. Signor Giuseppe Rossi and his wife Lucia held hands, their whispers silenced by Poirot's presence. Miss Clara Henshaw, the botanist, gripped her notebook, her expression defiant. "Les amis," Poirot began, his voice smooth as velvet. "We are trapped by the storm, but also by secrets. To pass the time, I propose a game, a masquerade of truth. Each of you will share a reason someone might wish you harm. A hypothetical, bien sûr, but it will amuse us." His smile was disarming, but his eyes missed nothing. The guests shifted, uneasy but unable to refuse. Lady Vaughan went first, her voice halting. "I suppose someone might resent my position by influence. Envy is a cruel motive." Poirot noted her vague words, her eyes avoiding Dr. Laurent. Was she shielding someone, or herself? Mademoiselle Dubois laughed nervously. An actress makes enemies, jealous rivals, spurned admirers. Perhaps a critic I once mocked? Her flippancy rang hollow, and Poirot saw her glance at Harper, a flicker of fear in her eyes. Harper grinned, his tone brash. A journalist steps on toes, exposing scandals, digging too deep, maybe someone I wrote about. His bravado faltered as he met Poirot's gaze, and Poirot wondered what story Harper feared being uncovered. Dr. Laurent spoke softly. "A doctor fails sometimes. A patient's family might blame me for a loss." His words were measured, but Poirot caught a tremor, recalling the poisoned tea. Did Laurent know his would-be killer? Signor Rossi's voice was firm. "In business, one makes rivals. Perhaps a deal gone wrong." Lucia nodded, but her eyes were fixed on the floor, and Poirot sensed a deeper truth in their guarded unity. Miss Henshaw's tone was sharp. "A scientist challenges beliefs. Some dislike my work on rare plants, its implications." Her cryptic words intrigued Poirot. Her notebook, he suspected, held more than botanical sketches. Poirot leaned forward, his voice gentle but probing, and Herr Brandt. What motive might have led to his death? The room stilled, the crackle of the fire the only sound. Lady Vaughan hesitated. He was powerful. Power breeds enemies. Mademoiselle Dubois whispered, "Perhaps a woman scorned." Harper suggested, "A business rival, crossed one too many times." Laurent said nothing, his silence heavy. The Rossi murmured, "A debt unpaid," and Miss Henshaw added, "Secrets he kept too long." Poirot's moustache twitched. Each answer was a mask, but cracks were forming. He recalled the letter from Klaus Richter, accusing Brandt of betrayal. Laurent's reaction to the name had been telling, but so had Dubois' gasp and Harper's pause. The poisoning suggested someone feared Laurent's knowledge tied to Brandt's past. As the game ended, Poirot posed one final question. "If you were to hide a truth, where would you bury it?" The guests froze. Mademoiselle Dubois laughed too loudly. Harper's pen scratched, and Laurent's eyes flickered to Lady Vaughan. The Rossi tightened their grip, and Miss Henshaw's lips curled slightly. Poirot smiled faintly. "The little grey cells, They see through the masquerade, he thought. The game had revealed more than the guests intended. Fear, guilt, and motives intertwined. The killer was close, and Poirot's net was tightening. Chapter 11. The Shadow in the Storm. The Chalet d'Hiver groaned under the weight of the unrelenting blizzard, its walls battered by winds that seemed to carry whispers of secrets. The third night had fallen, and the snowbound guests were restless, their nerves frayed by the murder of Herr Wilhelm Brandt and the near-fatal poisoning of Dr. Emile Laurent. Hercule Poirot stood by a window in the library, his grey-green eyes peering into the swirling white void outside. The clues, the vanishing footprints, the stopped clock, the poisoned tea, the letter from Klaus Richter, the motives unmasked in his parlor game, were pieces of a puzzle. But a new enigma was about to test his logic. A shadow in the storm. The guests had retired early, their alibis and motives still ringing in Poirot's ears. He had chosen the library for its quiet, its shelves of leather-bound tomes, a sanctuary for his little grey cells. But as he studied Brandt's journal, its cryptic entry, "The snow hides all, but not forever," etched in his mind, a flicker of movement caught his eye beyond the window. A figure, cloaked in darkness, moved swiftly through the blizzard, its outline blurred but unmistakably human. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, swallowed by the snow. Poirot's moustache twitched. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, "a phantom in the storm?" No, Hercule Poirot does not believe in phantoms. He donned his overcoat and summoned Jacques, the caretaker, who appeared with a lantern, his face pale. "Monsieur Jacques, you saw nothing outside tonight?" Poirot asked, his voice sharp. Jacques shook his head, his scarf slipping. "No, Monsieur Poirot. The storm is too fierce. No one could be out there." But his eyes darted to the window, and Poirot noted the fear in them. Poirot ventured to the chalet's main door, the cold biting through his gloves as he examined the snow beyond. The drifts were deep, undisturbed, yet a faint trail, smudged and shallow, led from the chalet's side entrance toward the east wing, where Brandt's body had been found. The trail was fresh, the snow not yet covering it fully, but it ended abruptly, as if the figure had dissolved into the storm. Poirot's mind flashed to the vanishing footprints on the balcony. Another trick, or a new clue? He returned to the parlor, where the guests had been roused by the commotion. Mademoiselle Celeste Dubois stood by the fire, her shawl slipping from her shoulders. "A figure outside," she gasped, her voice trembling. "In this storm, it's impossible." Her fear seemed genuine, but Poirot caught a flicker of calculation in her eyes. Mr. Samuel Harper, his notebook open, scribbled furiously. "A ghost story to sell papers," he said, his tone half joking, but his hand shook. "Who'd brave that blizzard?" Poirot wondered if Harper's bravado hid knowledge of the shadow. Dr. Laurent, still weak from the poisoning, leaned against a chair. "No one could survive out there," he said, his voice hoarse. "It's madness." Yet his eyes avoided Poirot's, and Poirot recalled his reaction to Klaus Richter's name. Did Laurent know the figure? Signor Giuseppe Rossi and his wife Lucia stood close, their faces pale. "We saw nothing," Giuseppe said firmly, but Lucia's hand trembled in his. Poirot's ears caught her whisper in Italian. "Louis, is it him?" Who, Poirot wondered, was him? Miss Clara Henshaw, her notebook clutched tightly, spoke coldly. "The Alps are full of shadows. Perhaps it was a trick of the light." Her dismissal was too quick, and Poirot noted her grip on the notebook, as if it held secrets she feared to reveal. Lady Eleanor Vaughan, her composure strained, twisted her ring. "This is nonsense," she said. "The storm plays tricks on the mind." But her eyes darted to the window, and Poirot sensed her fear was not of the storm alone. Poirot addressed the group, his voice calm but commanding. "This figure, it is no illusion. Someone moves in the storm, and they do so with purpose. The little grey cells, they ask, why now? What do they seek?" He paused, watching their reactions. Mademoiselle Dubois's breath hitched. Harper's pen paused, and Laurent's jaw tightened. The Rossi whispered, and Miss Henshaw's eyes narrowed. Lady Vaughan's ring-twisting stopped abruptly. Poirot paced, his mind weaving the clues together. The shadow in the storm, the vanishing footprints, the stopped clock, the poisoned tea, the letter from Richter, all were threads in a tapestry of deception. Was the figure the killer, returning to cover their tracks, or a new player in this deadly game? The chalet's isolation made an outsider unlikely, yet the trail suggested someone had braved the blizzard. As the guests dispersed, Poirot lingered, his eyes on the window. The shadow hides, but not forever, he thought, echoing Brandt's journal. The killer was growing bold, and Poirot's net was closing. He would find the truth, even in the heart of the storm. Chapter 12. The Truth Beneath the Ice. The Chalet d'Hiver's grand parlour was a stage set for revelation, its candlelit glow casting long shadows across the faces of the snowbound guests. The blizzard outside had softened to a mournful howl, but within, the air crackled with anticipation. Hercule Poirot stood at the centre, his small frame commanding the room, his grey-green eyes sharp as they surveyed the gathered company. The murder of Herr Wilhelm Brandt, the poisoning of Dr. Emile Laurent, the vanishing footprints, the stopped clock, the cryptic letter, the shadow in the storm, all were threads in a tapestry Poirot was ready to unravel, if only in part. Tonight he would lay a trap for the killer. The guests sat in a tense semicircle, their nerves frayed by days of confinement and fear. Lady Eleanor Vaughan clutched her handkerchief, her composure brittle. Mademoiselle Celeste Dubois twisted her silk shawl, her eyes wide with unease. Mr. Samuel Harper's notebook lay open, his pen poised but still. Dr. Laurent, recovered but pale, sat rigidly, his hands clasped. Signor Giuseppe Rossi and his wife Lucia held each other's gaze, their silence heavy. Miss Clara Henshaw gripped her notebook, her expression guarded. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice smooth but piercing. "The truth, like ice, is cold and clear, yet it lies beneath layers of deception. Tonight I will reveal certain truths, but the final piece remains hidden for now." His moustache twitched, a sign of his calculated intent. He held up Brandt's journal. Herr Brandt wrote, "The snow hides all, but not forever." A warning, perhaps, of secrets he knew. A letter from Klaus Richter, accusing Brandt of betrayal, points to a past grudge. "Dr. Laurent, you reacted to Richter's name. Why?" Laurent's face tightened. "I knew of Richter in Zurich. He was ruined by Brandt's dealings, but I had no part in it." His voice wavered, and Poirot noted the sweat on his brow. Poirot turned to the group. The footprints that vanished, leading only to Brandt's body, suggest an impossible crime. Yet a faint depression in the snow by the balcony railing, a brush, not a step, hints at a device, perhaps a rope or cloth, used to obscure tracks. He paused, watching Miss Henshaw's fingers tighten on her notebook. Did she know of such a trick? The clock stopped at 9:47. Poirot continued. Was no accident. A blow cracked its Poirot continued. Was no accident. A blow cracked its glass, timed to the murder. Someone passed it, perhaps in haste. His eyes lingered on Harper, whose pen trembled slightly. The poison tea, meant for Dr. Laurent, was a warning or a mistake, Poirot said, his gaze shifting to Lady Vaughan. The cyanide was precise, placed in one cup. Only someone close to the tea service could have acted. Lady Vaughan's handkerchief fluttered, but she said nothing. Poirot paced, his voice rising. The shadow in the storm, seen last night moving near the east wing, was no phantom. A trail, smudged but fresh, suggests someone ventured out, perhaps to retrieve evidence. He watched the Rossis, whose whispered "Louis" echoed in his mind. Who was he? He stopped, facing the group. Each of you has a motive. Lady Vaughan, your influence hides a fear. Mademoiselle Dubois, your charm conceals a past. Monsieur Harper, your notes betray calculation. Dr. Laurent, your silence speaks of guilt. Signor and Signora Rossi, your secrecy binds you. Miss Henshaw, your notebook holds more than plants. But one of you has woven these clues into murder. The room was silent, the guests frozen. Mademoiselle Dubois' breath hitched. Harper's pen fell. Laurent's hands clenched. The Rossi eyes widened, and Miss Henshaw's lips parted slightly. Lady Vaughan's handkerchief slipped to the floor. Poirot smiled faintly. The killer believes they are safe, hidden by the snow. But Hercule Poirot sees through the storm. Tomorrow, I will name the murderer, unless they confess tonight. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The trap was set, and the killer, he knew, was watching. As the guests dispersed, their footsteps heavy, Poirot lingered by the fire. The truth was close, buried beneath the ice of deception. One false move, and the killer would reveal themselves. His little grey cells were poised, ready for the final act. Who do you think Poirot's trap will catch? Share your predictions in the comments. Can you name the killer before the final denouement? Chapter 13. The final denouement. The Chalet d'Hiver's grand parlour was a stage for truth, its candlelit glow casting a warm but unforgiving light on the assembled guests. The blizzard outside had relented, leaving a crystalline silence, as if the Alps themselves awaited Hercule Poirot's revelation. The murder of Herr Wilhelm Brandt, the near-fatal poisoning of Dr. Emile Laurent, the vanishing footprints, the stopped clock, the cryptic letter, the shadow in the storm. All were pieces in a puzzle Poirot had meticulously assembled. Now standing at the room's centre, his small frame commanding, his grey-green eyes gleaming, Poirot was ready to unveil the killer. The guests sat in a tense circle, their faces pale, their eyes fixed on Poirot. Lady Eleanor Vaughan clutched her ring, her composure crumbling. Mademoiselle Celeste Dubois twisted her shawl, her charm faded. Mr. Samuel Harper's notebook lay closed, his bravado gone. Dr. Laurent, recovered but wary, sat rigidly. Signor Giuseppe Rossi and his wife Lucia held hands, their silence heavy. Miss Clara Henshaw gripped her notebook, her defiance wavering. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice a blend of calm and authority. "The truth, it is like the snow, pure, but easily muddied. Tonight, Hercule Poirot will clear the storm and reveal the murderer among you." His moustache twitched, a sign of his triumph. He held up Brandt's journal. Herr Brandt wrote, "The snow hides all, but not forever." A warning of secrets he held. A letter from Klaus Richter accused him of betrayal. A business deal that ruined Richter's family. "Dr. Laurent, you knew Richter in Zurich, did you not?" Laurent nodded, his voice hoarse. "Yes, but I was no accomplice to Brandt's schemes." Poirot continued. "The footprints that vanished on the balcony were a trick. A cloth, dragged from the railing, smoothed the snow, erasing return tracks. The faint depression I found confirmed it. He glanced at Miss Henshaw, whose fingers tightened. You, mademoiselle, know of such devices, no? Your botanical studies include ropes and fibers. Henshaw's lips parted, but she said nothing. Poirot pressed on. The clock, stopped at 9:47, was struck in haste, its crack revealing the killer's path to the east wing. The poisoned tea, meant for Dr. Laurent, was a warning. He knew too much about Brant's past. The cyanide, subtle, was placed by someone with access to the tea service. He turned to Lady Vaughan. You poured the tea, madame, but you were not alone in the parlour. Her eyes widened, but Poirot shifted his gaze. The shadow in the storm, seen last night, was no outsider. A trail led to the east wing, where evidence was hidden or sought. Poirot paced, his voice rising. The killer is clever, weaving a tapestry of deception. But the little grey cells see through it. Mademoiselle Celeste Dubois, you are the murderer. A gasp rippled through the room. Dubois' face drained of colour, her shawl slipping. Me? No, Monsieur Poirot, you are mistaken. Her voice trembled, but Poirot's eyes were unrelenting. You were in love with Klaus Richter, Poirot said. 10 years ago, Brant's betrayal ruined him, drove him to despair. You, an actress, met him in Zurich, and when he died, you vowed revenge. You came to this chalet, invited by a mysterious host who knew of your past. The dagger with the snowflake crest was yours, a memento of Richter's family. Dubois shook her head, but Poirot continued. You entered Brant's room through the balcony, using a cloth to erase your tracks. You struck the clock in haste, stopping it at 9:47. The cigarette butt, Les Gauloises, was yours, left carelessly. You poisoned Dr. Laurent's tea, fearing he recognized you from Zurich. The shadow in the storm was you, retrieving the cloth you hid in the snow. Dubois' eyes filled with tears. No, I loved Klaus, but I didn't. Poirot raised a hand. You acted with precision, but not perfection. The journal's words haunted you. Brant knew someone sought vengeance. Your glances, your nerves, your false alibis betrayed you. Hercule Poirot sees all. Dubois collapsed, sobbing. He destroyed Klaus. I had to make him pay. The guests stared, stunned, as Jacques stepped forward to restrain her. Poirot turned to the others. The host, still absent, orchestrated this gathering, knowing secrets would surface. But the truth, it is mine to reveal. He smoothed his moustache, satisfied. The chalet's secrets were buried no more. What did you think of Poirot's solution? Share your reactions in the comments. Did you suspect Mademoiselle Dubois, or did Poirot surprise you?